the share screen settings, Sandra, please. Thank you.
Thank you. It looks like it's about to come back. So I'm just sharing again now. Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you.
I'm hoping that you can see my screen.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Lovely. Welcome back. I don't know what happened there. I'm sorry. It just stopped.
That's right.
So I was talking about token economies, and that's where we give students a prize or a reward on top of using behaviour-specific praise. It's very common here in primary schools, in elementary schools. In our high schools, sometimes our teachers tell us that students don't like being given prizes or tokens, but it depends on what you give them. High school students might not be motivated by a sticker, but I can tell you if they get to buy an item from the canteen, from the tuck shop, that often will be exciting for high school students. They often like food as a reward. So many of our high schools think about different ways that they can reinforce high school students for demonstrating the right behaviour. I'm going to share two more techniques and then we're going to have a stretch break because I know you've been sitting and listening and you're listening in a second language, which is always much harder to do. I wish I knew enough Bahasa that I could give this presentation in your language, but I can't, I'm sorry. So I'll make you listen two more and then I'll let you take a stretch break. So my next technique I want to talk about is behavioural momentum. In this technique, it's used when students sometimes find it really hard to start. So for example, I might say to my Year 4 students, I want you to write a procedural text to show me how you would make your lunch. And normally if I was writing a procedural text, I would write things like step 1, take out some rice. Step 2, pour over some water. Step 3, and so I would step by step explain how I would make my lunch. If a student finds it really hard to get started, one of the techniques that we use as a behavioural technique is called behavioural momentum. And what this technique is meant to do is to help children who find writing hard build the motivation to want to be able to have a go, even though they find it hard. So for a student who has difficulties with writing, I might break it down for them and I might say, I want you to start by writing today's date in the top right-hand corner of the page. And then I wait and I let them do that one thing. And then I might say, it's common in Australia that children will have a sandwich for lunch. So I might say to them, do you like bread or bread rolls or wraps? And they might say, I like bread. So I might say, well, your first step would be to take out the bread. And they would write that down as step 1. And then I might say, do you like butter or no butter on your bread? And they might say, I don't like butter. And so, great, we don't have to write that step. You're not going to use butter. Then I might get them to think about what's the best sandwich you've ever had? And they might say, well, I really like sandwiches that have chicken and lettuce and tomato. So then I would get them to think about, well, if you're going to make a chicken and lettuce and tomato sandwich, you've got your bread, what do you think that you need next? And so I'm building the momentum for them to write that activity, increasing their motivation, even though they find it really hard. So again, with our pre-service teachers, when we're getting them ready to go out on placement, we get them to think a little bit about the task that they're going to be teaching and what will you do if you have a student who has trouble starting that task? What is something that you could do with that student or that small group of students that would help motivate them and get underway? If I've got children with disability in my class, I might even have pictures of all of the items that I would need to make a sandwich. And I would ask them, from these pictures, which items would you like? And I might have a picture of chicken and tomato and lettuce and bread and butter. And I might even have carrot and cucumber. And they might pull the items that they like. And then I get them to think about how they would make that sandwich. And then we get them to write. So we build their motivation for the activity. The last technique I want to talk to you about before we take a stretch break is how we would do what we would do if we have lots of talking starting to happen in our classroom. So we have a problem in Australia, and I don't know if you have this same problem in Indonesia, but our classrooms are being quite noisy. And we've even had a government inquiry recently into how noisy our classrooms are. And classrooms tend to get noisy when the teacher is doing all of the talking. If the teacher talks for a long time, children might start to talk. So one of the things that we teach our pre-service teachers to do is if you have a lesson and you've been talking for a little while and children are starting to talk, maybe you could stop for the moment and do what we call an opportunity to respond. And so what I might say to the students is, I want you to whisper to the person sitting next to you what I just said. And it shows then if children are listening, because if they're listening, they will remember what I said. If they've been talking, it gives them a chance to catch up if they've missed some information. I might ask some questions. So I might go around to the room and say, okay, we've been talking about fractions for a little while now. I'm going to ask some questions. Get ready to put your hand up. I'm going to ask, what is the number called at the top of a fraction? And so I break up my lesson by now asking some questions. Or maybe I might do some what we call choral responding. And that might be where I say, on the count of 3, I want everyone to tell me what is the number called at the top of the fraction. 1, 2, 3, and everyone would yell out numerator. Or I might ask them to do a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Thumbs up if you think it's the numerator, thumbs down if you think it's the denominator. And they would show me with their thumb up or their thumb down which they thought. And I can then look at my class quickly and I can see, oh, most students had their thumbs up, but a couple had their thumbs down. So it shows that they don't quite understand yet. I need to do a bit more teaching. I might ask them to do a handshake. Yes, I understand. No, I don't understand. I might ask them to show me a number on their chest. Is it a 5? Is it a 4? Is it a 2? So they give me an answer by pointing. I might even get them to write their answers on a little whiteboard that they have on their table and then hold up their answer. All of those are called opportunities to respond. And we use those techniques when children are doing talking and they're meant to be listening. And it's a way, instead of me getting cross and saying, you should be listening now, it just breaks up my lesson and it allows me to check in and see if my students have understood what I've been teaching. Now, I've been talking for about 45 minutes straight, and I know that we have 2 hours together in total. So I'd like to keep some time at the end for questions. I thought we'd take a small break now. If you're sitting in a chair, you might want to just stand up and stretch. I'm just going to watch the clock for a minute and I'll give you a minute to do what you need to do. Maybe you need to refill your water bottle. I'm going to stand up and stretch. You do what you need to do and we'll come back in 1 minute.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Prode.
All right, hopefully you've had a chance to stretch. Normally in my class at university, we would take a 5-minute break in the middle of our 2-hour lectures. But I want to make sure that there's time at the end for people if they have questions. So I'm going to keep going if that's okay.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Phil.
All right. The next technique that we learn as part of our behaviour course is to think about how we give instructions to our students. Now, this might be a slightly difficult activity for you to have a look at, but on the screen, you can see a task that a teacher designed and gave out to children. And in that task, it says, write the following words in alphabetical order. And then to try and make it clear, they added the order they come in the alphabet. Then to help the students, they wrote the alphabet at the top of the activity. Then they gave them 6 words. You can see the words are apple, pumpkin, log, river, fox, and pond. And then they crossed out the word apple. And with the students, they said apple starts with A, so that should come first. And then they handed it over to the students and said, you do the rest. This is an answer given by a student. And you can see that they've done something very wrong. What they've done is instead of writing the list in alphabetical order, so had they done that, it would have been apple, then fox, then log. Instead of writing the list in order, they've taken the letters in each individual word and they've written them in alphabetical order. Technically, if you look at the instruction, write the following words in alphabetical order, they have done exactly what the teacher said. But what the teacher meant to say is write the following list of words in alphabetical order. And they may have actually have made it clearer if they'd provided a longer example. They wrote in the word apple, spelt correctly, and then maybe put the letter F for fox to suggest that that could be the next word. The mistake that's happened is because the instructions weren't very clear. So we spend time in our pre-service teaching class getting our students to deliver a part of a lesson where we critique how clear their instructions were. If we're giving children instructions to move from the desk to come and sit on the carpet, how can we make that clear for students? Because we know when we give that instruction, sometimes we'll have kids that will push things out of the way as they're walking. They'll knock things off other children's desks. They'll push someone who's sitting in the spot that they want to sit in. And so we practice how we give instructions in classrooms to make sure that students feel confident that their instructions are being given in a way that isn't going to cause any students to make mistakes. Another technique that we know that works really well when we're supporting children with their behaviour is to give children choices. All of us feel happier when we have choices. Imagine if you came home every day and you had no choice in what you had for dinner, what you were allowed to watch on television, what books you were allowed to read, what time you had to go to bed, what time you have to get up. That's not a very exciting life. The same happens in classrooms. Sometimes in classrooms, we tell children what they have to do, what book you have to read, how many words you have to write. We don't give them a lot of choices. So building choice can reduce student behaviour. Letting children choose the topic that they write on, giving them a chance to ask questions or decide on the content, or to pick materials or resources, or to choose the strategy that would work best for them. Choosing if they want extra help, if they want a scaffold, choosing the format that they provide their response in, choosing who they present their answers to, or what group they work in, or what projects they work on. We know that if we can build choice, it actually helps in the learning process because children will be more motivated to want to do that activity. One of my favorite authors is Dr. Anita Archer, and she has a social media account on X, or formerly Twitter, and she gives her Archerisms, uses her last name, and she calls them Archerisms. And one of her favorite little sayings or Archerisms is, if you expect it, pre-correct it. And what that means is, if I do something in a classroom, if I give an instruction and I expect that some children are going to make mistakes, then before I let them make that mistake, I should offer a correction early. So if I'm waiting for my class to come inside my room, they've had a break, they've been outside playing, and now they're coming back in. If I know that I have a group of kids that are not very good at lining up, instead of waiting for them to make mistakes and then getting angry because they didn't line up properly, I can pre-correct by saying, Year 4, I want you to line up in 2 rows, girls at the front, boys at the back. And I want you to find a friend and hold their hand. Then I've corrected the behavior and hopefully more children will be doing the right thing. In classrooms, we can pre-correct lots of mistakes that kids make. There are lots of little errors that children make. If I ask my children to start writing, there is always going to be 1 or 2 or 3 students who have a broken pencil. So the first thing they're going to do is either put up their hand and say, my pencil's broken, or they're going to get up and want to use a sharpener to sharpen their pencil. So I might say something like, we're going to do a writing activity, take out your pencil. If your pencil is broken, put your hand up and I will come round and give you the sharpener. And that way, I'm not going to be interrupted by students yelling out that they have a broken pencil, because I expected that someone would have a broken pencil and I've pre-corrected so that I don't have that behaviour problem. For those of us who have been teachers for a long time, one of the things that we've learnt is the importance of our body language. And everyone that I know who's a teacher has the teacher look, which we've all mastered, which tells students that, you're not doing the right thing right now. I'm really focused on you. Make sure you're listening, working on our eye contact, thinking about how to make our voices interesting, having a balance in our voice so that we're not too loud or too softly spoken. Sometimes students, pre-service teachers, they'll speak really loudly in the classroom, or sometimes they'll be so quiet you can't hear them. And it makes it really hard as a student if your teacher's voice isn't nice and strong. Making sure that we look like we're interested. I went to a primary school. I went to a Catholic primary school. And in a Catholic primary school, we're always taught to sit with our arms folded. But if I sit with my arms folded, it can look like I'm being cross, because sometimes children associate teachers' crossed arms as the teacher being angry. So we try to make sure our students keep their hands open when they're talking so that students don't think that they're angry. Making sure that when we praise children, they can see that we're happy with them. They can see on our faces that we're happy. Adopting a thinking pose. What does my thinking pose look like when my students are giving them thinking time, smiling at my students, giving students space if I've had to correct their behaviour, moving away from them and giving a chance for them to correct their mistake, and making sure that I don't put my body in a position that makes a student feel uncomfortable. So I'm not going to stand behind my students and lean over their chair, or stand in front of their desk and lean towards them, because that might make them feel threatened or uncomfortable. But I might crouch down beside them so that I'm at the same height as them and I'm having a conversation on the same level as them. So over time as a teacher, you develop what you feel comfortable doing in terms of your body language. There's a saying, I won't say the saying because it has a swear word in it, but I have a resting grumpy face. The word grumpy is sometimes replaced by a swear word. I have a resting grumpy face. So if I have no facial expression and I'm just looking at students, my mouth turns downwards. And so it looks like I'm cross. And sometimes I have these little lines on my forehead. And so it looks like I'm frowning at students and I'm angry, especially if I'm thinking. So if someone says something to me and I'm thinking about it, I might go, but that could look like I'm angry. So I have to be conscious of what my face looks like to think about how I can show students that I'm really interested in what they're saying and that I'm not cross at them. But my face tells students certain things. So I spend time practicing as an early career teacher, videoing myself or asking other people to watch me and give me feedback to tell me whether I could do anything to improve my body language or my facial expressions. All right, now I'm going to go into some more complex stuff. So the things that I've been talking about so far were all examples of those tier 1 universal green techniques that we know if we can use those as a classroom teacher, they're effective with most children. But in our schools, we do always have some children who make mistakes with their behaviour and they do the wrong thing. So I mentioned at the start of my presentation, about 1/3 of Australian schools, or just over 3,000 of our schools, have been trained in the framework called positive behaviour support, which comes out of the United States. And in that framework, one of the things that they get teachers in schools to do is think about what are some examples of minor behaviour problems, things that the teacher can handle on their own, and what are examples of major behaviour problems that if a student did those things, by yourself as a teacher, you might not be able to address them on your own. So a minor example might be a student not being respectful. If I go into my room and I say good morning to my class and one student is rude, I as a teacher can handle that. But if I have a student who is being unsafe in my classroom and maybe hurting another child or hurting me as the teacher, I might need some help with that. So we say to our pre-service teachers, ask your teacher or your colleagues when you get a job, what are examples of the minor types of behaviours that students might make in this school and the major types of things that this students will do? And every school is different. So in one school, it might be that sometimes children swear in class, and if they swear in class, the teacher handles that. But in a different school, if it's a school perhaps that comes from a faith-based background, a religious background, that swearing in that school might be considered a major problem because it goes against the faith and it goes against the beliefs of that community. And so it's important to know what are minor behaviours and what are major behaviours. And what our schools are doing is they make this list like the one you can see on the screen, where on one side they talk about the minor behaviours and what a teacher will do if a student makes a minor mistake. And on the other side, they talk about major behaviours and what happens if a student makes a mistake that is a major behaviour mistake. A major behaviour mistake. What I wanted to give you today is some examples of how teachers respond when students do the wrong thing. So if I have a student in my class who is calling out, they're meant to be raising their hand to answer a question and they're calling out all the time, then I might call on their name. I might just only have to say their name, Petra. And when I say the name, the student immediately sits up and listens because they hear their name and they go, oh, I've done the wrong thing here. Just saying their name is enough. But I might also want to make sure that if I am doing that, I want to make sure I also say hello to that student every day, because if they hear their name in a negative way, they might start to get upset by that. So I want to make sure that I also each day then touch base with that student and try to say their name in a positive way. Get to know a little bit about that student outside of school, what they're interested in, what happens when they're not at school, what's their life look like outside of school. I might let the students know a little bit about me and what I like and what I'm interested in, whatever I feel comfortable with. I'm not their friend. I'm not there to be their friend, but I can be friendly. I can talk about what I'm interested in. We might have some fun together as a class. If I've had a really difficult day where students have been really naughty, maybe I need to have some fun if I've spent the whole day being cross and rousing at kids. I want to make sure I have really clear and high expectations for my children. I might involve them in creating that matrix that I showed you right at the start. So I might say to them, give me an example of what you think it means to be responsible when we're in our classroom. What does it mean to be respectful when we're out and we're playing on the oval? I want to make sure that I'm transparent so that children know what will happen if they're doing the wrong thing. So I might say, I can see that you're both talking and we're meant to be working quietly in pairs. If you can't work quietly in your pair, I might see if I can get you to work with someone else so they know what is expected if they don't change their behaviour. Treating the students equitably, not equally, means that I take into account what their needs are. And the number one prevention of misbehaviour is to have an engaging lesson. If your lesson is interesting, if you feel confident teaching it, that will reduce problem behaviour significantly. But if students are doing the wrong thing, sometimes I might ignore them. Sometimes I might praise the other students who are doing the right thing. Sometimes I might go and stand next to that student, and just by being next to them, I mentioned before, we call that proximity control. So just by standing next to that student, they might start to behave. Sometimes I might stop the whole class and we might demonstrate the right behaviour again. So for example, if I've asked the students to move from their desks to come and sit on the floor, if I have everyone's rushing and pushing, I might say, everybody stop. Okay, I would like Leanne to demonstrate walking quietly and nicely to the floor. Everybody watch Leanne, and she would do that and walk and sit on the floor. And then I would say, all right, these three students, I want you to do that as well and show me how you would do that. I might have a signal or a cue. I mentioned before, I use my little music maker. And that's my, if students are being too noisy, I might shake that and then get everyone to listen. I might remind the students, year threes, we're being too noisy at the moment. I want you to use your whisper voices. I might sometimes keep students back after class and do some additional teaching with them about what is expected if that's needed. I might have to do some problem solving. So if I've got a student who is misbehaving because they don't know how to start an activity, I might have to sit with them and do some problem solving, or maybe I'll have to do some extra practice with them. I might have to teach them a social skill or a behavioural skill. Sometimes students might have to make up for work that they've missed. Sometimes we might ask them to do an apology or a mediation, particularly if they've hurt somebody else. We might sometimes give students choices. Sometimes we make a phone call or we email a parent if a student is being particularly difficult. Sometimes I'll just alter my activity. Sometimes students will go into a temporary timeout where they won't be able to work on that activity for the moment. They might have to do something to make amends. So if I have a student who makes a mess, I might have them clean up the mess that they've made. They might even lose a privilege. So they might not be able to be first in line. They might have to go to the end of the line. Sometimes I'll create a contract where I say, over the next week, this is the behaviour that I want you to work on. And each time I see you demonstrate that good behavior, I'll give you some praise and write a note in your contract. Sometimes we'll have a parent interview where we'll bring parents into the school, or we'll send home a note to the parents. Sometimes I'll get them to teach other students. So if I have a student who might be very difficult, I might get them to show other students how something is done to change the role for them. And occasionally in Australian schools, a student might be sent to work in a different classroom. These are all of the possible ideas for how teachers in Australia respond if students aren't doing the right thing. These are some examples of all of the ideas that teachers might use if students are not doing the right thing. In this last part of the presentation, which will go for a little bit, it's quite a lengthy bit, what I'm going to talk about is how to respond when things are getting a little bit heated. So it might be, for example, that I say, Year 4s, take out your notebook and a pencil. And then I have a student who says, I don't want to. And I might say to them, we're going to do a writing activity and you're going to need a piece of paper and a pencil. If you don't have a piece of paper or a pencil, I can give you one, but we're going to do a writing activity. And the student might say, this is dumb. I don't want to do this. Now, I can tell when that happens, we are starting to escalate. And as a teacher, I have to be very careful how I manage in that moment. So I'm going to talk about the techniques that we teach. Again, I don't know if your students are like this in Indonesia. Maybe your students never do this sort of behavior. So when we have students who are being really disrespectful, it can be very confronting. And it also can feel very public. If you are a pre-service teacher or an early career teacher, you can feel really nervous when a student does that. And you might feel like everybody is watching you and they're waiting to see how you will respond. You might even feel threatened by a student, or you might feel really angry at that student for not following your instruction. In that moment, what we try to teach our students to do is to just be clinical. And by that, I don't mean to be cold or aloof. I mean that I want you to think about a way that you can respond that is both respectful and supportive, but you're going to try and de-escalate the conflict. You don't want it to get any worse. I've asked a student to take out pen and pencil or paper and pencil. They've said they don't want to. I've said, please take out your paper and pencil, and I've offered to give them some if they don't have any. And they've said, this is dumb. So now I'm in this situation where I've got this tense student who's getting angry, and I need to think about how I can respond. When we're in that situation, we use a technique called the LAD technique, and that stands for listen, acknowledge, agree, and then defer. And this is what it means. We listen to what the students are saying, not how they're saying it. So it doesn't matter if the student's shouting or they're angry, just listen to what they're saying. Acknowledge to the student that you've heard them. Tell the student what they're saying, agree with them that what they're saying, whether or not it's true. And I'll give you an example of what I mean in a minute. And then let the student know that you'll speak with them in a moment. Not right now, you'll speak with them in a moment. So here's an example. A student might say, I'm not doing any of this stupid work and you can't make me. In that moment, you can feel really scared, really upset. You've designed this wonderful activity. You're really hoping that the students will like it too. You've handed it out, and then this student says, I'm not doing this stupid work and you can't make me. You're like, oh no, what do I do? So you might say to the student, I hear you're really angry at moving right now and you're not in the mood to listen, and that's okay. I respect that. I hear you're really angry and you don't want to do this work right now. That's okay. I respect that. Then if they keep complaining, you might say, I hear and I've understood that you don't want to do this work. Is that right? Thank you for letting me know. I know you don't want to do this work. Then if they say, well, you can't make me, I might say, you're right. I can't make you, and it's not my style to force you. I was hoping that you'd make the decision to complete this work so that we can move on to the next topic. And then if it continues going, we might say, I think we're going to be headed for an argument. I can see that you're really angry. I don't want to do that. I'd like to work with this out with you. Let's talk about it after class, or let's talk about it in a couple of minutes. Let me get everyone else started on the activity, and then I'll come back and have a chat with you. So what you've done is you've acknowledged that the student is worried, they're angry, they don't want to do the work. And instead of getting into an argument with them in front of everybody, you're just going to leave them for the moment, get everybody else working, and then go back and spend some time with that student and see if you can get them to start. And the next step might be, you might have to say to a student, I'm really interested in what you want to say, but now's not the best time. I need you to tell me after class. Or I might say something like, wow, you must be really angry to tackle me like this in the classroom. I'm not sure how to respond. Let's talk about it later. Or I really want to understand why you're so angry, but using that language, swearing at me, that's not helpful. So let's talk about it after class, or let's talk about it in a moment. So we're giving ourselves some space, and we're allowing that student a moment just to calm down if they're really angry. Now, if they get even more angry, and this happens occasionally in schools, but not often, we'll have students who might throw things. And so we might say, I can see that you're really angry, but throwing a chair is not going to solve this. I need to use words. Let's solve this after class. Let's calm down, and I want to hear why you're upset. I can tell that you're unhappy or you're bored or you're angry. And it takes a lot of strength to keep working when you don't see any point. Thanks for being so strong. Or, I can see that you don't look like yourself today. That must feel rotten. Let me know if you need some time out. All of these are sentences that we can use when we've got a student who's really angry, just giving them a little bit of space so that we try not to make things any worse. I might even say, I'm not sure right now how to respond. Let me take a minute and then I'll come back to you. Especially if I'm feeling really scared or really angry, it just gives me a minute to think about, how am I going to respond to this student so I can calm down? We could say something like, now that you've said that, I don't really know what you want from me in this situation. Or, I do need to respond, but I'm not sure how. Can you help me solve this? What do you want from me? All of these little sentences are things that we can say. When you think of something, can you help me out and let me know what you think we should do next? Or what should we do next? Or where do we go from here? So if we take through an example, you might say something like, Kyle, I would like you to stop talking and to get on with your worksheet. That's the behaviour that we want from Kyle. We want him to stop talking and to do his worksheet. Then I might say, if you continue to talk, I'll need you to move desks and you'll need to go and sit over there by yourself. That's our consequence. Then I might say, I'll give you a minute to decide and I'll allow that student to think about it and I'll move away. And while I move away, that student is either going to start working or they're going to keep talking, in which case they're going to have to move because that's what I said I would do. So if they do the right thing and they start working, the next time I go past them, I might say, oh, Kyle, you got number 1 right. That's a great answer. Or I really like how you've started your story. Or your handwriting is really neat, Kyle. Or just something to positively interact with that student. If Kyle is still doing the wrong thing, still talking, then I might say, did you make a decision? Have you made your decision yet? You need to stop talking. If you can't stop talking, you'll need to move. So thank the student for thinking about what decision they want to make. Sometimes in Australian classrooms, and I don't know if this happens in yours, but sometimes a student is so naughty that a teacher might make a decision to remove the student from the room. And if they remove them from the room, one of the things that we say is students might be better off in the room learning than sitting outside in someone's waiting room. So it's a big decision to send a student out of class. If you send a student to the office, they're just going to be sitting waiting for the deputy principal or the principal. That's a lot of lost learning time. It's also, once you send a student out of a classroom, it's really hard for your relationship with the student and try to rebuild your relationship. It also sends a message to that student that you can't handle them, that you don't have any strategies in your skill set to be able to manage that behavior. So it's important that if we do send a student out of the room, we have to get more information ourselves as a teacher on how we can support students and their behavior in the future, because that student will have learned that they can get out of class by doing the same behavior next time. And also, if we're going to send a student out of class, we need to do it in a way that maintains both our and their dignity. We don't want them to be humiliated or embarrassed, because that can cause us more problems later. So with Kyle, if I had said to Kyle, you need to start on your worksheet. If you can't start on your worksheet and you want to keep talking, I will have to move you. I'm going to give you a moment to think about it. And then I look back over and Kyle is still talking. And I go over and I say to Kyle again, Kyle, I'm not sure if you've made a decision yet. I've asked you to start on your worksheet or I will need to move you. And then I move Kyle to a different seat and he starts talking again and distracting other students. Then I might say, Kyle, your behavior is stopping me from teaching, or your behavior is stopping other children from learning. You know, I really respect your opinion and I like you being in our class. I really wish you could stay. However, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. I hope that you decide to come back in when you're ready to learn. And so it reminds Kyle that he's really important. We don't want him to go out of the classroom, but if he really can't work on his behavior right now, he might not be able to be in the room. I might say, I'm going to ask you to make a choice to either leave the room or stay and get on with your work. If you choose to go, I really hope that you come back quickly. So some examples, we don't use that technique very often, and it really is reserved for the most serious of major behaviors where students have continued to disrupt learning and really are causing a difficult time for other students in the room. So I only have a couple more slides. I'm going to do some key questions for you to think about with behaviour, and I'm going to show you some resources, and then I'm going to open up for some questions. So some key questions that I'd love you to think about after today is, what behaviour does a student exhibit when faced with a challenging interaction? Which of these behaviours for you are the most problematic or are causing you concern? And what do those behaviours, what impact do they have on the functioning of your classroom? So the reason that I ask you those three questions is I only ever address behaviour if it's impacting on learning. If I have students who are talking in my classroom, it could be a sign for me that I've been talking for too long and I haven't given the students enough chance to chat with one another. I only really react to behaviours that are impacting on other kids' learning. And then I want to think about, how do other students show appropriate behaviours in the similar situation? And does this child have the ability to demonstrate that behaviour? Does the child have a disability? Is maintaining attention for a long time really difficult for that student? In which case, I might have to change some of my practices. That's something for me to reflect on as a teacher. There's 3 websites. Again, you'll get a copy of these slides after today. There are 3 websites that are my favourite websites that I go to for information and support about student behaviour. The first one is the PBIS.org website. That stands for Positive Behavioural Interventions and Supports. And that's the framework that I've been speaking about today that starts with that matrix of expected behaviours, and it talks about tier 1 approaches for supporting student behaviour. A second website is pbisworld.com. If you go to that website, it's designed for teachers who are having a problem with a student in their classroom. And so when you go to the home page, it will have a list of all of the types of behaviour problems that you might have. And so it might have, for example, students talking when they should be listening. And so you can click on that tab and it gives you ideas of how to respond when you have students who are demonstrating that behaviour. And on that cover page, it has lots of different behaviours. Children lying, children bullying other children, children calling out in class, children swearing. So you can click on whatever behaviour you're having a problem with, and it's got examples of lots of different strategies and techniques that you can use. And then the third website is a website called behaviourdoctor.org. That website is from a retired professor in the United States. Sorry. Her name is Dr. Laura Riffle. Dr. Laura Riffle. And she has spent her whole life as a professor on behaviour. And in the section that I've listed there, material-download, she's got an amazing set of resources that you might find helpful if you're having any trouble at all with a student and their behaviour in your classroom. Lots of techniques and resources that are useful. They're my 3 favourite websites. I've talked about some references in my session today, but I wanted to thank you for the chance to talk to you about supporting student behaviour. We still have just under half an hour to go, so I wanted to use this remaining time to allow you to ask me any questions that you might have about students and behaviour, or for me to offer you advice if that's helpful to you. So, Ibu Petra, I will hand to you. Thank you. And you might like to see if there's anyone who has questions. I'll stop sharing
Thank
my
you.
screen.
Thank you.
And
Thank you very much, Dr. Pod. Well, actually, I'd like to greet also our wonderful, not only wonderful students of PGSD, UNNES, but also other students. When we actually have very special guests here, Dr. Pod, we have Eugene Mainaka. He's a very best friend of mine, and he's actually a doctoral student right now at the Washington State University in United States of America. And he might have a question for you. I'm not sure if he's still available to ask for question, because he mentioned that he's going to have a meeting very soon.
I think I see him
So
still
Eugene
online.
Mainaka, you might have a, yes, he's still online. Eugene, do you still want to have a question for Dr. Pod, Eugene? And we actually also have Ibu Liftia here, Dr. Pod, joining our
Wonderful.
session. Yeah.
Fabulous.
Hi. Oh.
Hello, Shirley.
So
Nice
lovely to see you,
to see
Abilifty.
you here.
I was
So,
also going to say, if anyone doesn't feel comfortable asking a question and would prefer to put it into the chat, even if you want to write it in Bahasa, I have Google Translate open. So if you do write a question, I will translate it myself and try and answer it for you. So if English makes you feel uncomfortable, please type your question in the chat, and I'm following the chat now. So I'm happy to answer your question if I can.
mhm. Or any one of you who wants to ask? Yes. Okay.
Raised hand.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. So, as we know, when we're talking about class lessons, we could assume that we should handle a group of students of more than one student. And I guess it's natural for student, in this case a kid, to easily feel jealous when they see different treatment among their peers. They can think that uh, maybe is it okay to misbehave so they can get the much attention as their friends gets from the teacher their teacher by their act misbehave like that. So how to handle that situation?
Thank you. That's a wonderful question. And I get asked that question here in my classes as well in Australia. One of the things that I would say is that it is the difference between the words equality and equity. So if I give an example, if 4 people are waiting to see a doctor and each of them has a different ailment, maybe one of them has a cold, maybe the second person has a broken arm, maybe the third person has a cut and it's bleeding, and maybe the fourth person is having some chest pains. If every person went into the doctor and told the doctor what was wrong, first person goes in and says, I have a cold, and the doctor said, I will give you a Band-Aid, a plaster to put on it. It's not going to help. Second person goes in, I think I have a broken arm. The doctor says, well, I'll give you a bandage to go on that. That could be helpful. Third person goes in, they have, I don't know what I said, let's say the chest pain one. The doctor says, I'll give you a Band-Aid or a bandage. That's not going to be helpful. So when I teach a class, in my very first lesson, I actually tell that story and I adapt it if the children are very little or if they're older. So I tell it in a way that is easily understood for those children. And then I say, my job is a bit like a doctor's. Each one of you will need something different from me on different days. Some of you might need extra help with your reading. Some of you might need extra help with your behaviour. And my job is to work out what help will be best for you. And so the way I help one of you will be very different to how I help someone else. If I have one person and they break their pencil, I might let them get up and sharpen it, but for another student, I might give them a brand new pencil to work with. If I have a student who doesn't do well in writing, for one student, I might sit with you and help you with your writing. For another student, I might let you work with a friend to do your writing. It's my job to work out the best way to help each of you. So one thing you will know in my class is everyone gets treated differently because I am doing what is best for you. And that way, when I have a student who say, that's not fair, how come he got to? What that student is telling me is that they feel like they haven't been treated equally. They expect to be treated exactly the same as that other student. And what I'd be saying to them is, you didn't need that. But if you want that, you can have that too. So if that's something that would help you learn better, I can put that in place for you. But I try to use that story and I vary it depending on the age of the children in every class on the first day that I teach them. So they know I am the type of teacher who will never treat everyone exactly the same. Everyone gets what they need and it will be different for everybody. I've used a similar story with food. So I say, imagine you're having a birthday party and you invited 10 of your friends and you knew one of your friends, they were starving. They don't get much food in their house. They're really, really hungry. And another friend, they get a lot of food in their house. Like they will not be very hungry. As a good host, you would maybe allow people to have different serves. Some people might get more food. Some people would get enough to keep them satisfied. You would never say, well, no, everyone is only getting one slice of bread or everyone is only getting one bowl of rice. If someone wanted a second bowl, you would give that to them. That's what my classroom is like. Everyone gets what they need. I hope that helps.
Thank you so much for the answer. It really helps.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Pot, and thank you for your question, Alki. And we actually also have Dr. Nuzulia, Siti Nuzulia, our Vice and our foreign network. If you might want to say hi to Dr. Poet,
Hello,
Dr.
Dr.
Zulia.
Put.
Hello, Dr.
Sorry,
Nazilka. Lovely to meet you.
I cannot open my camera. Sorry.
That's okay.
Sure.
I can see your
Alright.
lovely photo.
Yeah, thank you.
It's a pleasure to
Yeah.
meet you. I see that Ibu Lifty has your hand up.
Yes. Yes, Ibu Lifty.
Yeah. This is my turn.
It
Yes,
is.
please.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. Okay, thank you. Nice to meet you again, Shirley. Yeah.
It's lovely to see you.
Yeah. I have a question for you. This is a great talk and many inspiring idea for handling student behavior in the classroom. And usually we in modification behavior we use reward and punishment, and I see your presentation is really good. Yeah, I think many reward to giving out or provided teacher to a student. How about the punishment? It is really needed, or we have to modify the punishment to other other form of treatment. Yeah, actually this is a punishment, but they include more positive way. How about that?
Thank you. That's a lovely question as well. Punishment is one thing that is very difficult, and let me explain why. What you might think is a punishment might actually serve as a reward to a student. So let me give you an example. If a student is really naughty in a classroom and you think I'm going to send them to go and talk to the principal, you might think that that's a punishment. But actually, if the student really likes the principal and thinks that the principal is this lovely person, they might be naughty every day in order to get sent to see the principal because they really like the principal. They get to speak one-on-one. The principal is very kind. The principal spends time with them. Another example might be if you're a parent in the home. When I was a little kid, if I did the wrong thing, the punishment that we were given is that we were sent to our bedroom. And being sent to my bedroom was the place where all of my books and my toys were. So that was a great place to be sent because then I could play in quiet with all of my books and all of my toys. If I don't like what I'm doing in the classroom and I work out that I can be naughty and the teacher will send me to the principal, that gets me out of doing the work. So even though we think it's a punishment, it's actually a reward for the student. So in Australia, we have moved away from punishment. I don't know the law in Indonesia, but in most Australian schools, we are no longer allowed to hit children in any way. There are some religious schools that have an exemption, and there are a very small number of religious schools in Australia that still have the cane that they smack children with if they're naughty. That is the worst, strongest punishment that we've ever had in Australian schools, and most schools no longer do that. So in terms of punishments now in Australian schools, we more talk about the consequence, so what happens immediately after the behaviour. And in my slide presentation, I gave you a list of all of the ways that teachers might respond to behaviour. And so the worst punishments would be children being sent out of class, children needing to go and work in a different classroom, or children being kept after school. Sometimes very few schools will keep children on a weekend. So they might say, you have to come back into school on a Saturday, I think that's a punishment for the teachers more than the students, because that means a teacher's got to be there to look after them. But we do have some private schools, some fee-paying schools where children do have to go in on a weekend and do what we call a detention. But they are the strongest punishments we now have. And as I said, we use them cautiously. If I live in a home that is not very nice, I might be very happy to go to school every Saturday and stay with this lovely teacher and do some gardening. That might actually be fun for me. And so what ends up happening is you have students who repeatedly do the wrong thing because they get to come to school every Saturday and do some gardening with a lovely teacher, which they prefer to do than being at home. So we really get teachers to think about punishment carefully and only use it very strategically. It's not something that is very effective.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Toad. And Ibu Leaf, do you have further questions on that or?
Yeah, great answer and many
Mhm.
inspiring. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And so we have a question from Eugene Mainaga, Dr. Bode, and
Yes.
he's going to listen to your answer through YouTube. And
Okay,
so
thank you.
yes, and so he's asking when students are somehow indicated to have ADHD and
Mhm.
that their emotion is not very somehow they're having this up and down emotions. And of course, that will be very difficult to be diagnosed when they're still very little.
Yes.
Do you have tips to deal with them when they're behaving, especially when completing tasks? Or do you think it will be something that we can deal with uh, almost the same when dealing with students who are naughty compared to ADHD students?
Thank you so much. I actually think it's a privilege to have a student in your class who has a diagnosis of ADHD. And the reason that I say that is it actually makes you a better teacher, because ADHD as a diagnosis comes because children have a number of difficulties. And one of the difficulties that they have is either they can be hyperactive or impulsive, do things without thinking, or they can be inattentive. So they find it hard to maintain focus on a task that is not interesting to them, and they become hyper-focused on everything else. They hear the fans spinning, they hear the dog barking down the street, they hear teachers in other rooms, they hear every conversation happening in the classroom. So they find it really hard to focus on the one activity because they're hyper-focused on lots of things. The advantage in having a child with ADHD in your classroom is you learn to teach better. We know that most children have, depending on their age, have a limited attention span. And yet, as teachers, we sometimes forget that and we design an activity that goes for far too long. And then luckily, most kids are good. Most kids will just do what you've asked them to do. Even if they're getting bored, they'll keep working on it. But a kid with ADHD, they won't do that because their condition is such that they find it hard to do that. So when I have a child with ADHD in my classroom, it reminds me to design my lessons with frequent breaks, with short bursts of instruction, with lots of opportunities for children to talk to one another and practice activities, and it makes me a better teacher. And so I don't look at ADHD as being a problem. I don't look at them in any way as being naughty kids. I look at them as being kids that have trouble being able to regulate in the same way that other kids, and they remind me to use all of those tier 1 practices that I talked about today. And I find it great having children with ADHD in my classroom for that reason. I thought I noticed someone else put up their hand, but they've put it down again. And I wondered if they still wanted to ask their question
Okay. Thank
while
you
I
for
was
your answer.
talking.
It was Dr. Nuzulia, our vice dean. So let me unmute her. He was out of there. Okay.
Yeah,
So
thank
we
you,
got
Mbak.
Dr. Livia and then Dr. Nuzulia. Yeah. Yes. Please.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Mbak Petra. Dr. Food, first of all, nice to meet you, even online. Yeah, it is an honor for us to having you here. And I have some questions here. In Indonesia, like in many countries, there are several challenges facing inclusive education because right now we still far from the ideal to health inclusive education. Like we still have a lack of infrastructure and resources. Many schools in Indonesia, especially in the rural areas, they still have a lot of things to do, limited teacher training, and also negative attitude and stigma. Also, we have inadequate policy implementation, and of course, financial constraints and geographical challenges. According to your experience, could you please tell us how the first when the Australian government tried to implement this inclusive education, what is the first thing we should do to go to the ideal stage of inclusive education itself, like such as in Australia? Thank you so much.
I appreciate your question. We are not perfect at inclusive education either, and we still have many things that we need to improve, but we probably have less challenges around some of those things that you've mentioned. So, for example, in terms of infrastructure, many of our schools now are designed that they could have all children with disability able to be educated there. They're physically accessible, but children, for example, who have autism, they would argue that we still have a lot of work to do in our schools to make them properly inclusive of children with autism. Where do you start? It's a good question. In Australia, we have had many starts at inclusion. So if we look back in the 1900s, many children with disability did not go to school at all in Australia. Then we moved to the creation of special schools designed just for children with disability. Then in the 1970s in Australia, we started to see schools created that had support classes for children with disabilities. So they would go to their local neighbourhood school, but they would never meet any of the children. They would be away in a room separate to the other children. Sometimes they might play together at lunchtime, but other times they would have separate lunch breaks and they would have nothing to do with the other children. And then in the 80s, mid-80s, we started to see children with disability in the same room as other children, but they could only be in those rooms if they could do the work at the same level and the teacher didn't need to make any adjustments. And then from about the 90s and the mid-90s, that's where we've really started to better understand that it's not about taking children with disability and putting them in a classroom and expecting them to keep up, but it's about redesigning what we do in classrooms to include children with disability just the way they are. So that's been the challenge for us, and we've spent time training our teachers to understand we don't have to fix disability. Disability is a natural part of our population, but we can mitigate the impact of disability. We can minimize the impact if we design our classrooms to be more inclusive. I work on a premise that if you want to achieve an outcome, If you want to achieve an outcome of a more inclusive education system in Indonesia, there are 3 elements that you need to work on: data, systems, and practices. The data will tell you where you're still facing challenges. So, how have you gone about including blind children in regular schools? What have you done for children with physical disability who need access support? What have you done for children with attentional disabilities like attention deficit disorder? What have you done for children with learning disabilities? Looking at the data for those groups will tell us what we've done so far and what we need to achieve. Once we know what we need to achieve, then we need to look at our systems and our practices. Our systems are things like our policies, they're things like the teacher training, our teacher preparation programs, the resources provided to schools, how they use those resources. They're our systems. And our practices are what teachers do in classrooms. They're what government officials recommend to teachers, what our university skills are being taught to our pre-service teachers. So for me, if I were in a government position now, thinking about how to improve inclusive education either in Australia or in Indonesia, I would be thinking about, to achieve that outcome, I would do an analysis of our data, our systems, and our practices. If I was a university and wanting to do some research on that, I would write a paper looking at what does our data say in terms of our progress towards inclusion, and then what are our systems and our practices. So Ibu Petra and a team from Indonesia, from UNNES, are writing with me a paper that is analysing what teacher training looks like in preparing teachers to work with inclusion. And one of the things our data is telling us is that we don't have clear information about exactly what is being taught to pre-service teachers at all of the different institutions. So if I was government and I was thinking I wanted Indonesia to have a more inclusive education system, one of the systems that I would improve is making it more transparent what pre-service teachers are being taught in order to prepare them to work in an inclusive classroom. And that would be one element of the many that you could then focus on.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Pot, for the answer. I think that's very important for us to dig in the data before we doing something else. Yeah, thank you so much.
I appreciate that. I'm conscious that we're very close to time. We have about 2 minutes remaining, so I might turn it over to Ibu Petra.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Pod. It's been amazing that you shared for us, especially to our students. They are the ones who will be leading in our classrooms in Indonesia, and it's very important to understand very detailed things and very practical things of what to do dealing with students with lots of needs and lots of conditions and backgrounds. As you know, that Indonesia comprises many cultural backgrounds, language backgrounds, economical and social backgrounds. So it is very important when they are sent throughout islands, thousands of islands in Indonesia. It's very important to understand that that's the real condition in our schools in Indonesia. And to all of us, the faculty members, to Dr. Liptia, Dr. Nuzulia, Dr. Farid Ahmadi, and Dr. Adi Purwanto, it's very important to us to understand that data, system, and practices will be the ones that we really need to put the focus on as the higher education who prepares the students to achieve their goals, becoming more professional teachers in the future. Well, thank you again, Dr. Poet, for your time. It's been very meaningful and fruitful to us as an institution, and we're looking forward to your coming this early June to honoring you as our adjunct professor. We're really proud of you, and we're really proud of your achievement. Again, thank you so much. And students, Dr. Poe, it's been very wonderful to us. So later on, if you want to write thank you notes to Dr. Poe, I'll be very happy to deliver it to Dr. Poe. And
Thank you.
yes, thank you again for your time, Dr. Poe. And hopefully we'll have more opportunities in the future.
I hope
Having
that
your yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Poe. And have a beautiful day, Dr. Poe, for the rest of your day. Have a beautiful week, everyone. And thank you again to our Vice Dean, Dr. Nuzulia, and our beautiful lecturer, Dr. Olivia, for joining us. And thank you all the committee members for preparing this beautiful guest lecture. I'm so proud of you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Poe. See you soon then.
Thank you. I appreciate the
Bye.
meeting.
Thank you so
I wish you
much.
well. Thank you so
Thank you.
much for the time
Thank you.
today.
And you too. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.